Okay, this recipe is for a masala chicken pie. I've got a tablespoon of oil in my frying pan and saucepan, and I'm just going to add one finely chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic. I've peeled the garlic, I just need to crush that. So 2 crushed cloves of garlic into there as well. So those can be scraped into the pan. And some root ginger. Because I'm at home, the root ginger that I use at home is frozen, because I don't often cook with root ginger. Much as I love the flavour of it, it's not something that I use a huge amount at home, so I have mine frozen and chopped from the freezer, and I'm going to put about a tablespoon of that into this pie. If you are using fresh ginger, the easiest way to deal with that would be to take about a finger length piece, because a tablespoon of root ginger is actually quite a lot. Peel that with a teaspoon, easiest and simplest way to peel it, and then grate it on your grater on the smallest side. And I am just going to start by softening my onions, garlic and ginger before I then add any of the spices or meat. I'm going to get my spices ready to add to the saucepan in a minute, and what I'm going to use is 2 tablespoons of my medium curry paste to start me off. So 2 tablespoons of medium curry paste, and then 2 teaspoons, I'm going to add to that 2 teaspoons of ground coriander. If you don't mind the seeds, you can use whole coriander. Don't mind the leaves in it, you can use whole coriander, and 2 teaspoons of cumin. And again, if you prefer the seeds, you can use the seeds, but I'm just putting 2 teaspoons of ground cumin into the pot ready. That was a bit short, that cumin. So that I can take these over and add these to my onions when they are cooked. Okay, my onions and garlic and ginger are starting to soften. I haven't got them on a particularly high heat because I don't really want them to brown. They're going to be in this pan for a little while when I add the spices and when I add the meat, and I just would like them to be softened and starting to cook. So they are starting, or they've started to go opaque or clear. They're not looking white anymore. So I can add the spices. So into my pan I'm going to add the curry powder, ground cumin and ground ginger, and I just want to cook these for a couple of minutes before I add the meat. So I just want to start cooking up the spices before I put any of the meat into this saucepan. So just for 2 minutes I'm just going to keep stirring, keep turning these over, and you should get the smell of all the spices coming up from your pan as you are doing this. Important that you don't let it burn, so don't let it dry up and burn while you are doing this. Okay, so I've cooked my spices off a bit, and now I'm going to add my meat into the pan. Now, I did say at the beginning this was masala chicken pie, but today, apart from that bit which just looks like pure fat, I am going to be using lamb to make mine. You can use whatever meat you prefer, it just so happens that I have some lamb. So when you've added whatever your choice of meat is into your pan, you need to stir this up, get your meat completely coated in the spices, and you need to keep stirring it and cooking it until the outside of your meat has changed colour And at the moment, even though I'm stirring it up, you can see, because I've got lamb, it's still quite pink. I want it to go brown. If I was using chicken, I would want to keep stirring this until the chicken had gone white. Okay, the meat has browned and it's all covered in the curry spices now, so I'm just going to add some more ingredients to my pan. I'm going to start with 2 teaspoons of sugar, and I'm just using white sugar. You can use brown sugar if you prefer, and 2 teaspoons of vinegar, and I'm using just white malt vinegar. So I've got my sugar and my vinegar in there. I'm also going to add 200 mils of coconut milk. So that's half a large can, and the other half of the large can I will use in the topping for this in a minute. And the last thing that I'm going to put in here is some tomatoes. You can use passata or a can of tomatoes, whichever you prefer, but 1 can of tomatoes, 1 can of chopped tomatoes, or about half a box of passata. About 200 mils of passata will be fine. And this just needs to be brought up to the boil and left uncovered to simmer to cook the meat. If you are using chicken, it will take about 20 minutes to cook the meat. This lamb might take a little bit longer. The meat needs to cook, if it's chicken, for 20 minutes, and it needs to be simmering all the time. When it's finished cooking, as this one has, you'll see that the sauce has thickened up a little bit. You need to taste it at this stage and adjust the seasoning. Add any extra seasoning if you think it needs salt. Double check, make sure that it's all right, and then the base for this can go into the dish you're going to make the pie in. Okay, while the meat is cooking, I'm going to do the potatoes for the top. So I have my potatoes ready, hopefully, when the meat is done. I've peeled about 1 kilo of potatoes. What's important, because we're going to mash these, is that you make sure you have no eyes or bruises in these potatoes. If you leave something like that in your potato, when you try to mash it, those bits will make lump and you won't end up with a smooth mash. So I've done 1 kilo of potatoes because I've cooked about 500 grams of meat. So this would be enough for 4 people. Obviously, if you are cooking with less meat or for less people, you cut down the amount of potatoes, or according to the size of your dish. We want these all the same size so that they cook in about the same time. So the easiest thing to do is to find your smallest potato and cut all of your other potatoes so they are about that size. So I've just cut that small one in half, and then I am going to chop the rest of my potatoes and hopefully keep them even about that size. I wouldn't chop them any smaller than this because they could boil away, and you don't really want your potatoes to boil away. Makes them much more difficult to mash. So this is the smallest that I would do them, and then they can go into your saucepan. This sort of size should only take 10 minutes possibly to cook through, so they're not going to be a huge amount of time, but you should be able to get them peeled and chopped and on to cook while your meat is cooking. To cook your potatoes, you just need to add enough water to cover them. If you fill your pan all the way up to the top, you've got to wait for longer for the water to boil. So just enough water in there to cover them and a little bit of salt. It's one of the few times that I will add salt when I'm cooking. So I'm going to bring these up to the boil, cook them, check that they are soft by just sticking a knife into them, and when they are soft I will drain them and continue with the recipe. Okay, the potatoes are cooked. If I put a knife in, it goes in really easily. They are starting to go a bit fluffy around the edges, so they are definitely done. And before I start to mash them, as we have curry underneath, just to make these a little bit different, I'm just going to add a teaspoon of turmeric into this mash. So that will help to give a slightly different colour, and it will continue the theme of the curry. So I'm just going to mash these to start with the turmeric and nothing else until I am sure that I've got them nice and smooth. Okay, I've mashed my potatoes with the turmeric, and one advantage of putting that in to start with is that you can see whether you've got lumps in there, because if you've got lumps they'll be showing white against the yellow of the turmeric. And normally to finish your mashed potato you might add butter or milk, but I'm actually going to put in the rest of the coconut milk to carry on the theme of the food. I kept some of the thicker bit of the milk off the top, and I'm going to start with that. So the other half of the can of coconut milk is what I'm going to add into this until I get a nice smooth mash. I wouldn't pour all of it in to start with, because you might find that it's just too wet and you end up with something that is far too sloppy. But you can see already that looks a little bit smoother, and as I want to pipe this, I'm just going to keep going for a little while, adding a bit more of the milk until I have a nice smooth mash that I think will be good for piping. Okay, I've added more coconut milk to this, and you can see I've got that lovely colour from the turmeric, and it is quite a nice soft mixture ready for piping. So that's just the spoon that was in the coconut milk. So I'm just going to get the end of that off my spoon and mixed up with the mashed potato. And the next thing to do is to just pop this into your piping bag. The potato is hot. Will have cooled down a little bit with the coconut milk, but it is actually better if you can pipe it while it's still warm. You get a much better effect than if you wait until it's cold. And I'm not putting it all in my bag to start with. I'm just going to put about half of it in the bag to start me off, and then I can start the piping. So I have the base of the curry in a casserole dish on a baking tray ready to go. Remember, hold your piping bag here in your fingers and twist the bit of the bag that's underneath, and you can see this is already coming out. It's lovely and soft for piping, and the trick with putting one mixture on top of another is to go around the outside first. As I'm piping this, I can see that the sauce from the curry is being shunted into the middle of my dish. If I just dump this on the top or in the middle of the dish, what would happen is all the sauce from the curry would go up the outside, and it would spoil the appearance of the finished dish. So I'm just going to go all the way around with the potato. and then into the middle. So I'm just going to use all my potato. I've got all the way around the outside nearly with this first bag full. There we go. And I'm just going to refill the bag and keep going until I've covered the whole of the sauce. Okay, I've finished piping the potato all over the top of this dish, and all I need to do now is bake it so the potato is browned. It's going into the oven on 180 degrees in a fan oven, so that would be gas mark 6, and it's going to be in there for 20 to 30 minutes just to brown off the potato, because everything in this dish is cooked, but I want it to be piping hot and golden brown on the top. This has been in the oven for half an hour, so it's been in the oven for 30 minutes. The potato is golden brown and it's hot all the way through, because you can see a little bit of sauce coming up the side.